As we embark together upon exploring the hallmarks of relationships steeped in mutual respect and dignity, let us cast off some common misconceptions. Respect extends far beyond mere platitudes or niceties. It is the bedrock upon which all enduring human bonds are built. Without this foundational element, what is left but conditional associations rooted in fear, manipulation, and selfishness rather than care, vulnerability, and wisdom? True respect manifests as an abiding reverence for the inherent worth of one another's philosophies, boundaries, and sacred journeys toward growth in reason and virtue. But how often do we unwittingly hold respect hostage to superficial considerations, granting and withdrawing it flippantly based on external status, appearances, or material benchmarks that pale in comparison to the divinity of an individual's intrinsic character? In doing so, we reduce our very perspectives on dignity to a valueless currency subject to the whims of ego's childish entitlements. Please leave your thoughts below in the comments. Sign number 1. Lack of respect as a warning sign. My friends, if we are to live a life in accordance with nature and reason, we must be ever vigilant against those who would erode the respect we are owed as human beings. How can we find the tranquility of mind when those around us treat us without the basic dignity we deserve? A lack of respect is like a venomous serpent. At first, its bite may seem trifling, but if left untreated, it can fester and spread poison throughout the body and mind. When someone close to you begins demeaning your worth through insult, dismissal, or other slights, it plants the seeds of self-doubt. You may initially rationalize it as an isolated incident, but a persistent lack of respect eats away at your self-esteem and sense of identity over time. As Seneca warned, the primary sign of a well-ordered mind is a man's ability to remain in one place and linger in his own company. When we experience a deficit of respect from others, it becomes difficult to be at peace with ourselves. We are consumed by hurt, anger, and anxiety about our standing in their eyes. This turmoil prevents us from achieving the imperturbable rationality the Stoics viewed as fundamental to human flourishing. How much of your precious mental energy and balance do you give up to maintain toxic relationships that leave you unappreciated? As Epictetus taught, there is only one path to happiness, and that is to stop worrying about things that are beyond our will. While we cannot control the disappointing actions of others, we can control the amount of negativity we accept in our lives. The wise course is to establish firm boundaries around what treatment you will endure and enforce swift consequences when they are breached through persistent disrespect. In the end, the path to virtue, wisdom, and eudaimonia requires surrounding ourselves with those who nurture our best selves through mutual care and high regard. Sign number 2. Persistence of lack of respect and mental health. If a lack of respect persists and embeds itself as a pattern in our relationships, make no mistake, our mental well-being is at grave risk. How can one maintain the calm rationality of a philosophic mind when continually exposed to the poisonous barbs of disdain and diminishment? Imagine tending a blooming garden, nurturing its beauty daily through conscientious care and tilling of the fertile soil. Now envision how that garden would wither and decay if someone were to trample upon it day after day, grinding the delicate blossoms into the dirt through thoughtless disregard. Such is the effect of an enduring lack of respect upon the human psyche. The subtle violence of careless words and actions compounded until our inner world lies in ugly ruin. We must be strong and wise enough to protect our mental peace from this toxic degradation. As Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it. When others insist on polluting our realm with behavior antithetical to our inherent worth, we must firmly revoke their power to shape our reality. Do not implant their disrespect within your mind and allow it to blossom into insecurity, anger, or self-loathing. Is avoiding this easier said than done? Certainly, for the sting of disrespect can cut deeply, especially from one we once considered a friend. But we must persevere through the transitory pain. As Seneca taught, he suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary. Why water the noxious seeds of disrespect with prematurely borrowed suffering? Instead, I ask you to cultivate indifference toward those who demonstrate a blatant and persistent disregard for your dignity. Let the pain of their actions wash over you and dissipate like a rising wave, leaving your unshakable island of self-esteem magically dry once again. Only then can you achieve the unshakable peace that is both the guide and practice of Stoic philosophy. Sign number 3. Establishing clear boundaries. If we are to safeguard our mental serenity and uphold our self-respect, we must be architects of firm personal boundaries. For what is a life well lived if not one where we stand resolute in defining how we will treat ourselves and allow others to treat us? Too often, we lack the courage and self-discipline to erect the supportive boundaries that keep destructive influences at bay. We become complacent in the face of disrespect, rationalizing away each succession of slights in the misguided pursuit of avoiding conflict or hanging onto the shards of a deteriorating relationship. But by failing to hold fast to our standards, we tacitly condone the subjugation of our dignity for the temporary salves of convenience or obligation. Ask yourself, what immutable principles or values do you hold most sacred? What inviolable core governs how you aim to walk through this world? Perhaps it is honesty and truthfulness in your dealings. Maybe it is treating all people with compassion regardless of their station. Or it could be committing fully to everything you pursue with an excellence of effort and purpose. Reflect deeply, for it matters not what these values are, only that you identify and integrate them into your person. Once you intimately know what you stand for, you must demonstrate an unwavering commitment to upholding those boundaries with your actions. If a friend lies to you or violates your trust, do you placate them or enforce consequences? When someone radiates negativity or toxic energy around you, do you absorb it or remind them that it is not acceptable? The true measure of a person is not what they preach, but what they practice through disciplining their philosophies into tangible form. As the old adage reminds us, no is a complete sentence. When deciding what relationships to cultivate or which to prune away for our well-being, we would be wise to heed these succinct words, for though others may rail against the personal boundaries that preserve our self-worth, we must stand firm in their conviction, much like the imposing cliffs that banish the crashing waves to their depths without apology. It is not the man who scorns, but the man who is scorned at whom we should blush and feel humiliation. Sign number 4. Negative effects on mental health. We must remain ever vigilant against toxic relationships that breed negativity and unhealthy within the soul. For what good is philosophy as a way of life if we neglect its prime directive, to fortify the mind for eudaimonic flourishing? Just as noxious airs can jeopardize the body's physical health, negative relationships and their attendant emotional turmoils act as insidious toxins that corrupt our mental and spiritual well-being. When we entangle ourselves with those who disrespect our worth through dismissive words and selfish deeds, it inescapably plants the seeds of anxiety, sadness, anger, and mistrust to take insidious root within us. Over time, These bitter brambles spread and disfigure our inner landscape into an unsightly thicket, our restful contemplations given to endless cycles of hurt, our rational minds contorted by obsessive replays of each perceived slight or betrayal. We find our hard-won tranquility and imperturbability steadily dampened by the demoralizing tendrils of an emotional contagion to which we've negligently exposed ourselves. Such desecration of our core equanimity is nothing short of self-inflicted sabotage against philosophy's first pillar, that we remain unshaken and impervious to externals beyond our control. For while we may not command the actions of others, we alone chart the course of what relationships we nurture and which ones we starve of their toxicity. To do otherwise is to willfully drink the soul's hemlock of choice. The wise understand there is no growth without labor and no philosophy without endurance. So rather than tormenting ourselves by perpetuating demoralizing bonds, we must firmly sever them and refocus our efforts inward, ruthlessly extricating those nagging thoughts like noxious weeds, diligently re-landscaping our mental gardens with the healing philosophies and supportive companions that replenish our reserves of tranquility and virtue. For as Epictetus instructs, there is but one way to tranquility of mind and happiness. Let this therefore be always ready at hand with thee, the operations of thy mind. We alone shape whether our mindsets are wellsprings of philosophical resilience or are surrendered as fetid bogs through our choices of association. Sign number 5, misaligned values. To live as philosophy instructs, with unshakable inner peace, virtuous character, and rational mastery over our judgments, we must be ever discerning about the company we keep. How can one hope to steer a steady course when their closest relationships are comprised of those whose values and principles are profoundly misaligned from our own? Just as a rudderless ship is susceptible to being thrown off track by the slightest current or gust of wind, we become unanchored when we allow ourselves to be unduly influenced by those who do not share our core philosophies on how to think, act, and live with wisdom. Through each compromise of our principles in pursuit of social harmony, each reluctant partaking of activities antithetical to our ethics, we slowly abandon the sturdy governance of our hard-earned beliefs and self-imposed discipline. To yoke ourselves to relationships where the other party's ideals regarding virtue, duty, temperate living, and conduct are utterly misaligned is to perpetually subject ourselves to the draining tug-of-war between our highest rational judgments and the pressures to betray them for glib acceptances. Each concession, however minor, erodes away at the solid foundations we've built to firmly stand upon. Need we really entertain such fruitless arrangements? We are born once and cannot be born twice, but we must be born again many times over. Why then would we squander this singular opportunity at living a cohesive, philosophically grounded existence by enmeshing our stars with those that cannot help but divert our course? Far better it is to cultivate relationships with those few kindred travelers who have labored diligently in reasoning and grappling towards values that harmonize in consonant orbit with our own. With them, we enjoy the peace of authentically coexisting without the persistent strain of compromising our cherished principles to keep their favor. We gain steadfast partners toward our shared vision of human excellence, rather than being perpetually outnumbered and outmaneuvered by those espousing contrarian dogmas to our detriment. While such a discriminating path may seem lonely at times compared to the crowded thoroughfares espousing more popular sentiments, we must take solace in marching lockstep alongside those valorous few who share our allegiance to living purposefully. It is only then that our journey through this philosophy of life can finally shed the weight of inner conflict and know the liberating integrity of convicted self-mastery. Sign number 6. Feeling of constant drain. My friends, of relationships that leave you perpetually drained and depleted. For what productive fruition can philosophy's teachings bear if we willingly squander our precious life force on imbalanced associations that leave us operating in a perpetual deficit? Just as the diligent farmer must be judicious about tilling fields with fertile, nourishing soil, we too must carefully assess whether our closest interpersonal bonds are generative and revitalizing to our core selves, or if they lay barren wastes that uselessly leach our spirits dry. An endless cycle of having to accommodate emotional fragilities, indulge narcissistic tendencies, or suffer the corrosive effects of negativity ensures our own lives remain impoverished rather than flourishing. What personal growth or enrichment can take root when our already finite reservoirs of energy are greedily consumed by emotional vampires who reciprocate none in kind? How can we progress along philosophy's path when the majority of our efforts are prematurely sapped on fruitless dramas and damage control rather than dedicated to our life's higher callings and cultivations? The wise understand that our vitality is the bedrock upon which all personal perseverance, resilience, and achievement are constructed. We must therefore fiercely guard its expenditure, the same as we would our society's most precious resource, investing it only in relationships and pursuits that replenish our stores rather than laying them to profligate waste. How many of our opportunities for greatness have we willingly thrown aside by pouring our vitality into toxic relationships that predictably squander it upon the compost heaps of dysfunction rather than prudently sowing its seeds in fertile grounds? Let us instead ruthlessly sever such draining bonds with the sage's sword, repurposing our reclaimed energies towards meditations that deepen our philosophic understanding, purposeful actions that earn merit, and nourishing relationships that exponentially enrich our collective virtue and supply us strength to endure. Sign number 7. Manipulation. A core tenet of Stoic philosophy is to live with uncompromising virtue, to conduct ourselves with honor, integrity, and genuine rationality that pierces through the distracting clouds of passion, manipulation, and bad faith. But how can we adhere to these lofty principles when we choose to surround ourselves with associates who persistently employ backhanded coercion and underhanded conduct to sway us from our autonomous path? Make no mistake, those who regularly resort to manipulation in dealing with others are exhibiting behaviors that are toxic, unethical, and utterly antithetical to the philosophic ideals we espouse, whether through deception, emotional gamesmanship, aggressive intimidation, or the exploitation of insecurity and vulnerability. The manipulator's core aim is to warp our agency and decision-making to their own selfish whims. With each unchallenged display of this egregious violation of our sovereignty, we tacitly surrender pieces of our hard-won Stoic fortitude. Some will claim these deceptive strategies inevitabilities in human interaction, imperfect methodologies we all occasionally indulge in when wanting to bend a will to our own. But I put it to you that we must draw an inviolable line. How can we truly value our own cultivation of incorruptible judgment and character when we allow such flagrant corrosions against it to take root in our closest circles? Worse, the more we tacitly accept these toxic behaviors through momentary resignation, the more we normalize them into the very marrow of our relationships, until dishonor and coercion are not only permitted but expected. Each allowance is like another inexorable step down the slippery slope of valuing the path of least resistance over the adherence to uncompromising virtue. The wise student of philosophy must remain ever vigilant against these poisonous threats by drawing secure personal boundaries and an unshakable commitment to only engage with those who deal in good faith. It is only in the company of those who match our conduct with authenticity, honesty, and respect for personal agency that we may safely let down our guard and nurture genuine connection. Sign number 8. Lack of trust. Trust is the bedrock foundation upon which all worthwhile relationships are built. Without this implicit faith that those we bring closeness to allow our authentic selves to exist without malice or hidden motive, how can we ever hope to experience the vulnerability required for true connection? Yet all too often, we ignore the ominous rumblings of trust being steadily eroded in our primary circles until our intuition can no longer deny the unsettling reality. The person whom we've granted access to the intimate sanctums of our inner lives may not be deserving of that privileged position after all. An unkept promise here, a lapse of confidence there, until the bedrock itself is comprehensively fractured by a singularly egregious betrayal. In that moment, we are left stumbling through the wreckage of broken blindness and crumbled assumptions about their character. The very relationship that once offered refuge from the external world's cares now morphs into a sprawling minefield where each interaction risks detonating another buried relic of deception. Doubts rigorously intrude upon what was once accepted truth, as we find ourselves compulsively revisiting every ante of faith we'd extended for potential sins of omission. This unraveling of trust cuts even deeper than the initial violation itself. Not only must we now grapple with the committed transgression, but engage in the exhausting second labor of interrogating our very ability to judge character and intent. It plants a noxious seed of cynicism that, if not forcefully extracted, takes sprawling root through the gardens of our other relationships and contaminates them with unfair judgments rooted in Hertz transference. The Stoic path forward in such desecrated bonds is to rip them out by the withering roots, like uprooting a diseased perennial. For what fertile ground for wisdom and eudaimonia can possibly take from a poisoned soil that corrodes the very spirit of openness, acceptance, and vulnerability required for human flourishing? While this culling undoubtedly burns, we must burn away the dead wood and detritus to restore the purity of our internal sanctums once more. As Marcus Aurelius sagely counsels, the universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. To surrender ourselves to anguished mistrust is to subjugate our highest reason to the whims of one's transgressions against it. The philosophic mind transcends such temporal pains, not through bypass, but with a fluidity of acceptance before refocusing energy towards cultivating relationships built on unshakable character and loyalty alignment. Sign number 9. Abuse of any kind. If we are to walk the path of philosophy as a sincere way of life, we must remain uncompromising in our refusal to suffer any form of abuse or mistreatment in our closest circles. How can we ever hope to cultivate the wisdom, fortitude, and tranquility that Stoicism demands if we allow the toxic erosions of emotional, physical, or psychological subjugation to persist unchecked? Let us be clear. Abuse, in all its insidious forms, represents an unconditional repudiation of our most sacred Stoic tenets surrounding human dignity, autonomy, rationality, and the inalienable self-sovereignty we each possess as cosmic beings of reason and virtue. To voluntarily entangle ourselves in relationships where such malignant forces are given sanction is akin to imbibing a soporific toxin that steadily anesthetizes our grasp on philosophy itself. With each instance, we accept the denigrating language that renders our self-worth subordinate, or wince at the threatened possibilities of harm for exhibiting the audacity of our own boundaries. The more we tacitly indoctrinate ourselves to accept abuse as an inevitability, we simply must emotionally and mentally condition ourselves against. Our principles gradually abandon us as we painfully contort into compliance with this subjugation of our personal liberties, all to assuage the deteriorating situation with perpetual placation and surrender of more shards of our dignity. Such a path is the antithesis of philosophy's true aims, of helping us attain the unshakable self-possession and crystalline judgment rooted in reason, that towers above the hurly-burly of life's unpleasant ephemeralities. The abuse itself is a sickening offense, but the graver wound is how it melts away the steely fortitude and clarity of mind that the Stoics charted as our supreme directive. If a person gave your body to any stranger he met on his way, you would certainly be angry. And do you feel no shame in entrusting your own mind to be corrupted by anyone, only paying them mere lip service? For if we lack the conviction to summarily extract ourselves from abusive bonds that so blaspheme our souls, we are accomplices in our own spiritual degradations. The philosophic mind acknowledges the pain of severing even the most toxically entrenched relationships, but it understands that to do otherwise is to extinguish our very potential for eudaimonia in favor of shackling ourselves to perpetual anguish and subjugation. Sign number 10, absence of growth or mutual support. True self-actualization and enlightenment through philosophy cannot be achieved in the confines of stagnant, growth-limiting relationships. Just as a tree starved of nourishing soil and sunlight inevitably withers, so too do our potential for continual refinement of reason, virtue, and character become stunted when not cultivated by associations equally devoted to our mutually transcendent expansion. Consider the profound symbiosis of relationships where both parties embrace the vulnerable yet revitalizing labor of constructive critique, perpetual learning, and supporting each other in relentlessly shedding egoic attachments toward our highest potential for human flourishing. In this fertile ground, ceaselessly turned and re-enriched, we gain steadfast partners not just along our respective journeys, but active catalyzing forces that vigorously uproot the insidious weeds obscuring our progressions while nourishing the tender shoots of newfound awareness and insight. Yet so many of us resign ourselves to arid, growth-choking bonds, with those possessing neither the insights to elevate our mindful explorations nor the vulnerabilities required to receive the same earnest counsel with grace. In these barren accords, we stunt our evolutions into mere performative routines, contentedly regurgitating situational appropriateness and socially conditioned narratives devoid of substantive depth or actualization. Over time, these philosophically inert relationships calcify our very conceptions of what scrutinizing self-inquiry and rigorous character development even consist of. Our existential complacencies become institutionalized by those with whom we surround ourselves. Our aspirations for the transcendent shrivel under spiritual deprivation until we accept self-obliteration as needless martyrdom. Epictetus warns us sharply against such complacencies. There is but one way to tranquility of mind and happiness. Let this, therefore, be always ready at hand, the operations of thy mind. These revolved, what can cast thee down? We cannot resign ourselves to emotional and intellectual stagnation without surrendering the very premise of embarking upon the philosophic path to begin with. Sign number 11. Persistent selfish behavior. While the philosophic pursuit is undoubtedly an individual journey inward, we must be ever vigilant against toxic relationships that relentlessly prioritize selfish impulses over the mutual consideration vital to any healthy human association. For how can we hope to elevate our contemplative minds toward wisdom when perpetually obstructed by the childish demands of those who would endlessly take without any intent to contribute in kind? True virtue extends beyond mere self-discipline. It requires an outward generosity of spirit devoted to propelling the philosophical progressions of others, just as we seek the same elevating guidance in turn. A profound imbalance that privileges hyper-individualistic entitlements over any acknowledgement of reciprocal obligations corrodes the very essence of relating as cohabitants on this shared journey of self-actualization. Those trapped in the solipsistic prisons of their own unchecked egos become sapping forces, perpetually making inadvertent claims on our bandwidth through neediness, obliviousness to impact, or outright territorial possessiveness. Enabling such malignant behaviors not only condones their propagation, but diverts our precious energies away from the rigorous self-inventory and truth-seeking so central to Stoic philosophy. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Why then would we consciously pollute the pristine wellsprings of our consciousness with associations that bring us perpetually off-center from our reasoned virtuous aims? Each moment spent indulging the dramatic fixations, irrational expectations, or oblivious self-centeredness of others is one robbed of our personal responsibilities to continually re-examine our core judgments and characterological disciplines. The philosophic mind merits surrounding itself only with those capable of participating in mutually supportive, elevating exchanges. For it understands that anything less risks surrendering our sovereign focus to the toxic whims of others' distortions and egoic urgencies antithetical to Stoic ideals. Sign number 12. Destructive communication. If we are to cultivate the virtuous mindset and rational fortitude that Stoic philosophy demands, we must be uncompromising in insulating ourselves from relationships mired in destructive communication patterns. For what insight or character growth can take root when the very seedbeds of dialogue are choked with noxious weeds of toxicity? Make no mistake, relationships where bad faith accusations, aggressive put-downs, harsh judgments, and threats of abandonment are the everyday currency of discourse, represent fertile grounds for little more than resentment, anxiety, and depleted self-worth to germinate. Each venomous barb chips away at our equanimity, and each scornful dismissal erodes the self-belief required to steel ourselves against passion's distortions. Slowly, this abusive climate conditions us to accept being berated and denigrated as ordinary rapport, our senses becoming numb to the glaring assaults against our reason, autonomy, and peace of mind that philosophy exists to safeguard. We internalize these unhealthy dynamics as unavoidable aspects of connection, unconsciously replicating the patterns in how we communicate with others and even our own self-talk. The insidious effects extend beyond mere emotional turmoils, robbing us of the very clarity of mind and willpower required to adhere to our philosophical convictions. Each instance we reluctantly engage with or absorb these poisonous forms of relating, we tacitly surrender our identities as impartial arbiters, interested in exploring truth through measured, enlightening discourse. Our minds become fragmented and agitated, hardly conducive for the disciplined introspection and wisdom cultivation Stoicism demands as our highest priorities. Epictetus issues us a sobering reminder: There is but one way to tranquility of mind and happiness. Let this therefore be always ready at hand with thee, the operations of thy mind. If we are to honor this teaching, we must curate our relationships with ruthless discernment, surrounding ourselves solely with those capable of engaging through the lenses of vulnerability, empathy, and mutual respect, so vital to authentic communication. It is only by pruning away those influences that insist on violating our rational faculties through toxic relating that we restore the fertile environments where profound ideas can take root, be cross-pollinated through compassionate disagreement, and uplifting consensus blossom forth. As we conclude this sojourn into the hallowed grounds of respect and its indispensable role in our human bonds, let the fertile seeds planted here take vigorous root within your philosophic consciousness. For if these discourses have illuminated respect's seminal position as the terroir from which our transcendent potentials for mutual understanding, growth, and ultimate self-actualization flourish, we must each courageously till its lessons into the very marrow of how we move through this world. No longer can we abide by diminishing respect to mere platitudes or base currencies, doled out conditionally based on ego's childish valuations. True respect represents an unstinting reverence for the profound divinity and personhood within every soul we encounter. The abiding commitment to buffering each other's deepest journeys toward virtue through authentic vulnerability and compassion. So I urge you all to bravely reflect and take action in reshaping your closest bonds around these sacred Stoic ideals. Extend your engagement through commentary and sharing so that we may elevate this crucial discourse in mutual dedication.